This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary Programme Signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary.
Please take your seats. Members, first item of business on the order paper is a motion to suspend Standing Order 20, brackets 1. It will be treated as a business motion and there will be no debate. Clerk, please read the motion.
That Standing Order 20, brackets 1 be suspended for the 10th of January 2022.
I call Dolores Kelly to move the motion.
So moved, Mr. Speaker.
Before we proceed to the question, I would remind members that this motion requires cross-community support. The question is that the motion standing on the order paper be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. I'm satisfied that cross-community support has also been demonstrated. The motion is agreed. Thank you. Members have been given notice by not less than 30 members that I have summoned the Assembly to meet today for the purpose of debating a motion on keeping schools open and safe. And I will ask the Clerk to please read the motion.
That this Assembly expresses its support for keeping schools open and operating in a manner that is safe for pupils, parents, teachers and staff. Further expresses serious concern at the lack of planning by the Minister of Education to ensure the safe reopening of schools in the context of the increased transmissibility of the Omicron COVID-19 variant. Recognises the staffing pressures that increased transmissibility will present for schools, and calls on the Minister of Education to urgently develop a plan that puts the safety of pupils and staff first through the installation of air monitoring and air filtration devices in all classrooms, and addresses the staffing pressures facing the education system by utilising and deploying additional teaching capacity to keep schools open and safe.
Thank you. And I call Pat Sheehan to move the motion. Thank you. And the Business Committee has agreed to allow up to 1 hour and 30 minutes for this debate. The proposer of the motion will have 10 minutes to propose and 10 minutes to wind. All other speakers will have 5 minutes. Please open the debate on the motion. Pat Sheehan.
And I welcome the opportunity to speak to this debate today, and I want to preface any remarks I make by saying that we're not 2 weeks into this pandemic, we're not 2 months into the pandemic, we're 2 years into it. And the reason for bringing the Assembly back was to give voice to school staff, to parents and to students to express their frustrations about the way things have been handled in our schools to date. This situation was entirely predictable. This is also about accountability and holding this Assembly holding this Minister to account. So I want to deal with a number of issues, and I'll try to get through as many of them as I can. There's the lack of adequate cover for teachers who are absent either through the pandemic and COVID-19 or through sickness or having to care for other family members. The issue of ventilation, contingency plans for examinations, contact tracing and other potential mitigations. Now, I accept that there is no silver bullet or panacea, but what I will argue is that there needs to be a combination of measures, a range of issues that can be introduced in our schools that can make them safer for staff and for students. And the first issue I want to deal with is the issue of substitute teachers and the lack of adequate cover that there has been. I made the point to the Minister on the 17th of December that no call had been made for retired teachers to come back into the system. In the same way, the NHS, at the outset of this pandemic, asked for retired doctors and nurses and other staff to come back in. So I was glad to see the Minister finally listen to what was being said. Unfortunately, it was only 2 days before Christmas when she made that call. There are a significant number of teachers in the Education and Training Inspectorate, in the Department of Education, in the Education Authority and in CCEA who are at desk jobs, who could be redeployed to pupil-facing roles to relieve the stress on our schools at the minute. And we could have the deployment of final year students into the classroom. Now, I wrote to the Minister on the 4th of December about this issue, and I finally received a response on the 6th of January. And I was given a long list of excuses as to why student teachers couldn't be deployed in the classroom. And one of the excuses was any enhanced teaching role could see students falling in between employers and higher education institution liability insurance cover, leaving them legally vulnerable. Really, Minister? Are you telling the Assembly here that your department couldn't liaise with the higher education?
All members make their remarks through the chair, please. Thank you.
Is the Minister really telling us at Corla that her department couldn't sit down with the higher education institutions and organise insurance for student teachers coming into the classroom? I mean, is that beyond their capacity? It's also the case that the NISTER list of substitute teachers needs to be updated. I've been inundated with calls from principals who are having real difficulty trying to get substitute teachers. One principal phoned 5 separate people on the list, and each of them told her that they were already in full-time employment. So we know there's a real debacle with the GTC-NI, and that became really clear after the summer, but it has been a problem for a number of years. But that list needs updated. I want to move on to the issue of ventilation in our classrooms. I'll give way briefly.
Very brief, and I thank the member for giving way. Just in relation to attracting former teachers back into the role temporarily to alleviate pressure. When the Health Service sought to bring retired staff back to alleviate pressure, they had the foresight to modify pension rates and pay scales to ensure fairness. At the present minute, that isn't going to be the case for retired teachers, and therefore pensions could be affected quite significantly. So it's a great pity, would the member agree with me, a great pity that they didn't have the foresight to deal with that as well when attracting people back. There's no incentive.
I absolutely agree. There has been no forward planning whatsoever. I want to move on to the issue of ventilation and air filtration systems. This isn't new technology, but it's proven technology. It's used in laboratories, in operating theatres, in aircraft to purify the air. No one is suggesting again that this is a silver bullet, that this will resolve all the issues, but it's a problem. It's a device that could help provide cleaner air in classrooms and therefore make the environment safer for children and for staff. Now, the issue of funding has been raised. The Minister knows the process for obtaining funding. It's her responsibility to cost these devices and then submit a funding bid to the Minister for Finance. The Minister for Finance will then bring it to the Executive, and the Executive will decide what funding to allocate. And even if there isn't sufficient funding to put air filtration devices in every classroom in the north, she should start with the most vulnerable. Put these devices into classrooms, into special schools where our children are vulnerable and where the contact is closest with teachers, and then primary schools where students, pupils aren't wearing masks. I'll give way very briefly.
Will the member be aware that this month the Sinn Féin Finance Minister proposed a 2% cut to the education budget 2022 to 25? And in that context, how can he stand on his feet and demand more funding?
Well, I'm aware that there's a monitoring round in January, and perhaps some funding will become available then. Let's start with special schools and then primary schools. But the important thing is, let's have a plan. And let's provide teachers with better protection than they already have. Let's provide FFP2 masks, where the evidence and the science shows us that there's a greater decrease in transmission when people are wearing FFP2 masks. Moving on to exams, there has been significant disruption already in our schools, and in all likelihood there's going to be more disruption over the next weeks and months. And the Minister needs to bring forward contingency plans similar to what were used last year. However, what she also needs to take account of is that there will be uneven disruption across the sector. Some pupils and some schools will be affected more than others, and it's important to ensure that individual students are not disadvantaged, and any assessment tool needs to allow teachers to take account of how individual learning has been disrupted among their students. Furthermore, there needs to be immediate discussions between the department CCEA and the unions, the teachers' representatives, to design contingency plans for our students in the time ahead. And in regards to contact tracing, there have been problems since schools restarted after the summer. There needs to be meaningful contact tracing in our schools, and isolation guidance should be reinstated, and bubbles in classrooms should be reintroduced again. Let me be very clear about this, Ceann Comhairle. The responsibility for the safe operation of our schools lies entirely with the Education Minister. 2 years into this pandemic, she has no plan, she has made no proposals, she has brought nothing to the Executive, and she has not asked for money for our filtration systems. That's her responsibility as Education Minister, and she has totally failed this basic test. Opening windows in classes isn't going to cut it. While our children are shivering in their classrooms, the Minister is dithering in the department. It's time for action. It's time for action now.
Thank you, and I call Robin Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise to oppose the motion, but I do want to thank every school principal, every member of our teaching staff, and every member of school support staff for all their dedicated work on behalf of our children and on behalf of our society. And
could the member, sorry, Robin, could you speak closer to the microphone, please? We're not picking you up. Thank you.
I hope I get that additional 15 seconds, Mr. Speaker. Like every member in this chamber, I've been contacted by parents, who have concerns about their children in school and want to ensure that their children are safe. We're in a pandemic, and why wouldn't that be the case? But indeed, Mr. Speaker, they want to know that their children can go to school, that the school will be open for the children, and they want to know that the children will receive face-to-face classroom teaching, and they want the children to mix with their other peers, and they want this because of their education, because of their physical health, and because of their mental health. And schools and parents deserve the support of everyone in this chamber, of every party in this chamber, and across this chamber. And school principals want to ensure pupils and staff are safe, and they need support from ENDE and effective communication and support from politicians. What they don't need is negative motion after negative motion. They deserve the support from the politicians similar to that offered to the Health Minister. And by and large, the Health Minister enjoys the support of this chamber, a collective support, a cross-party support, not motion after motion, negative motion after negative motion, cynical motion after cynical motion, attacking the Minister, whether it's this Minister or whether it was the previous Minister, Mr Peter Weir. I'll give way to the member.
I'm grateful to the member for giving way, and the member refers to cynicism. Would the member agree with me that it's the very definition of cynicism to convey the message to parents that HEPA filters would prevent the opening of windows in classrooms? That is blatantly not the case, and those that are peddling that myth should withdraw it.
The member has an additional minute.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm sure others will indeed take that up. But indeed, those who are expert in the field, and indeed the Chief Medical Officer, just prior to Christmas, indicated to schools that they should not axe carol services or gathering together. He hasn't got that concern that's outlined, or seemingly outlined, by the member today. And I think just last week, Professor Young attended the Health Committee, and he indicated, yes, children will get infected, but it is likely to be mild infection, and we do have to live with this virus. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, commenting on today's motion recall, said parents and teachers deserve better than political posturing like recalling the Assembly for what is little more than a political stunt, I agree with him. The hypocrisy of Sinn Féin's position, and Mr Sheehan's car crash interview last week on Good Morning Ulster. And the Sinn Féin Finance Minister has proposed a 2% cut to the education budget for 2022 to 25, which we, DUP, opposed. And taking account of that cut, 2% cut, would be 84 million shortfall in the education baseline, while education would receive additional resource funding. This falls well short of the money. It needs to continue programmes such as Engage, programmes that have been very much welcomed by principals. In short, this means that the Department of Education, over the period, now the 3-year planning period, on year one would receive, year one would have a 195 million gap, year two would have a 250 million gap, and year three would have a 300 million gap. And a Sinn Féin minister proposing cutting the education budget, while the entire Sinn Féin Assembly group calls for the education minister to spend massive amount of money in additional capital, which she does not have. What political dishonesty, duplicity and insincerity. Crocodile tears, as I think Dr. Paisley might have called it. I'm sure the minister will spend wisely any money allocated by the finance minister. And this pan-nationalist front signing this motion, Sinn Féin, SDLP and Alliance, are the coordinating group, rather than during the pandemic wanting to work with the minister, has sought to criticise for political advantage the Minister McElveen or Minister Weir. A health crisis, Mr Speaker, deserves a better response. Our parents, our principals, our pupils deserve the practical and ongoing support. And I note that indeed, in terms of CO2 monitors, and that within 95% of our schools have been received, and an additional 5,000 are becoming available. It's this type of support that will keep the pupils safe. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, and I call Daniel McCrossan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As SDLP Education spokesperson, I welcome the opportunity to speak on today's debate, given the enormity of the issue and the need to ensure that children's education and safety in schools is brought to the front of the agenda here at this House, and to also ensure that the safety of all teachers and other staff have been dedicated to delivering first-class education against the backdrop of intolerable pressures put on them over the course of this pandemic. I want to put on record my firm appreciation, and that of the SDLPs, to all our teachers and school staff right across Northern Ireland who have been working tirelessly throughout to ensure that children can remain in schools and safe given the circumstances they faced. Mr Speaker, I have to say at the outset I am extremely disappointed at how this debate has went. We are talking about children and young people and their education and teachers and classrooms and all of the things that are so very important at this time, and we're accused of signing a pan-nationalist motion. A pan-nationalist motion. Well, just for the member's record, Mr Speaker, all children in Northern Ireland are affected. All teachers, all schools. Doesn't matter what walk of life. So don't try and turn something as fundamental as children's education into a sectarian argument or bun fight, because that is not what this is. This is about children's education and protecting them. And I think that message needs to be rung very, very hard in this House. How dare anyone accuse me of signing a pan-nationalist motion? It's totally offensive, Mr Speaker, and I don't accept it. I'm sure others across these benches don't accept it either. Mr Speaker, I signed the recall motion to bring the Assembly back today as we've been highlighting for months that there has been a severe lack of planning and action taken to ensure our classrooms and schools are safe for reopening after the holidays. We have warned about that consistently at the Education Committee, in this House and through various correspondence with the Minister. It is vitally important that our schools are kept open. Vitally important. I totally agree. No one in this House disagrees with that. But that should only be done, and can only be done... No, I won't. I heard enough from the member on Radio Ulster the other morning. Up until now, many principals from across... Mr Speaker, Up until now, it might as well be considered an intervention. Up until now, Mr Speaker, many principals from across the North do not believe that it is safe, and we have seen cohorts of children move to online learning due to the significant concerns expressed over the threat of the Omicron variant in our schools. These concerns have gone largely unnoticed by the Department and the Minister, because I feel that I am constantly repeating the need for an action plan, for decisive action and for leadership to ensure that schools can stay open and be safe. There are significant staffing shortages in schools, with many teachers off at the minute who have caught the virus or who are self-isolating due to being in close contact in schools or at home. There has not been a proper plan put in place to tackle staff absences. Simply contacting retired teachers on the last day of term before Christmas is not the silver bullet for the department, and there are also issues for retired teachers, because if they do come back, their pensions could be significantly affected, given the demand that is required of them. Could the department not have planned this out better, given the months and months of concern expressed by teachers, principals and members of this House? The negative effects of schools and class closures, not just on the learning opportunities, but also very significantly on the physical and mental well-being of our children, are now well known. Reliance on digital learning is clearly a poor substitute, and the Minister should have far more robust plans in place than we currently see at present. Once again, our children and teachers have been failed. The spectre of exams being disrupted and groups of children, including children with special educational needs, being treated unfairly by having to face exams once again around the corner, coming very quickly. The Minister and her department could have had far more robust mitigations in place to avoid this shocking scenario, but now she is playing catch-up again, and our children have once again become the collateral damage. This is not good enough, and our children deserve better. Equally, the SDLP also believe there is a need to draw up similar shortlists for other educational school staff, and we have written in great detail to the Minister about that. But despite my constant calls for these reserved lists to be systematically put together, all we've had is token gestures towards supporting schools. It's simply not good enough. Air filtration, the argument is well made. We need these systems in our schools. There is no disagreement around that. We have spoken widely with the Department, with the Minister, with the Education Authority, with teachers and with schools. They are needed. Let's get this done. And I am not here today to fire the buns around the House, but I have to say there needs to be a greater collective responsibility in this House from those who have led this place for 15 years. 15 years. And if a simple conversation, Mr Speaker, can't happen between the First and Deputy First Minister or the joint First Ministers of this Assembly at this stage in relation to the education of our children, then we are in a hiding to nowhere. This needs to change. Children's education is the priority.
Members, time's up.
Schools open is the priority, and keeping them safe is the
Members,
priority.
time's up. Thank you. And before I call Robbie Butler, the next speaker, let me remind members it is a new year. This is a very important debate. The public out there are hopefully listening in on this, and maybe sometime when you hear some of the breakbacks, you don't want them to be listening in, but nevertheless, I would expect a lot of people will be listening into the conduct of this debate and the outcome of it. So please remember that at all times. So let's behave ourselves in the chamber today. Robbie Butler.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Hopefully you'll not have to direct those words to me during this, but can I start, Mr Speaker, by first of all thanking our principals, teachers and support staff for their monumental efforts to open our schools as safely as possible, and for their efforts to keep our schools safe and in school, which we all agree is the best place for them to be. There's little doubt now that one of the groups most negatively impacted by the pandemic has been our young people, particularly by loss of face-to-face education and time spent with classmates and friends. And the true cost of this will be calculated for years to come. But we must also thank our young people for how they have responded to these health protection measures and constructively contributed to our societal battle to combat this virus. I would also like to thank the mover of today's motion, Pat Sheehan, for the opportunity to reinforce the repeated calls from myself and the Education Committee to the Education Minister in regard to a more focused and deliberate strategy to improve air quality and ventilation in schools. Mr Speaker, if we cast our minds back just a couple of months, the emergence of the Omicron variant made us all sit up and listen. Absolutely, yes.
I appreciate the member giving way, and unlike the previous contribution, his is not full of sound and fury signifying nothing. If we're going to discuss the installation of HEPA filters in schools, I think it's important that we have the accurate figures in front of us. The basic cost is £1,100 per filter, plus a filter replacement of £300. So these are conservative estimates, and it's suggested by some experts that as many as 3 filters per classroom will be necessary. So when people go on the radio and say it costs £140 per unit, they're talking absolute nonsense.
I thank the member for his intervention.
Member has an additional minute.
I could have a minute and a half because that was quite an intervention. I'd also so anyway, I'll get back. Mr. Speaker, if we cast our minds back just a couple of months, the emergence of the Omicron variant made us all sit up and listen. Even early evidence told us that this was evidently a more transmissible variant, and whilst the longer-term health impacts were unknown at that time, it was obvious that actions to mitigate harm was indeed needed. And we certainly have learnt enough, and the population across Northern Ireland have suffered enough for us as legislators and decision makers to use the learning from before and to prepare better for the future. It could be argued that across some parts of these jurisdictions, and to some extent in the Republic, these concerns are being addressed. In England, for instance, an additional 7,000 air cleaning units have been announced, an additional 7,000 for educational settings. In Wales, money has been set aside specifically to deal with ventilation. And in the Republic of Ireland, funding has been made available specifically to allow schools to purchase air filter systems for classrooms. And whilst the Omicron variant has refocused this discussion, it must be remembered that advice in regard to good ventilation and air quality in shared spaces is not new. SAGE in November of 2020 published a paper on ventilation and air cleaning devices, and this advice is still worthy of application. While scientific and medical knowledge on the virus itself is trying to keep pace with the speed of mutations, one of the constant and most valuable pieces of advice as to how we protect ourselves and each other has been through the need to prioritise and utilise that triumvirate protections of mitigations through time, distance and shielding. And when we couple the triumvirate mitigations to a high and increasing uptake of the vaccination programme, hopefully we can return to a more familiar cycle of living and life and living. Some may have begun to believe that we are now at a phase where we can let our guard down. They would be wrong, Mr. Speaker. The phase that we are in is one where we have learnt much, but to continue a trajectory of a return to normality, we must still do our best to mitigate spread and infection of any and all strains of COVID. The vast majority of the population of Northern Ireland have adhered to the public health messaging by wearing masks when needed, not mixing socially when risk is at its highest, and their uptake of the vaccination programme. Data which is published regularly shows us that when we act together on the health advice, we see a decrease in the spread of the virus and hospitalisations, and by default increase the ability to function as normally as we can. For enclosed spaces where people mix in numbers, such as school classrooms, it is vital that every measure available is taken, and not only to reduce the risk, but also to build confidence for those who work and learn there. And the Minister has spoken recently that she trusts our principals and teachers to do their best for our children, and in educational, pastoral and social matters, I wholeheartedly agree with her. They are exceptional in their service to ensure each of our children develop to their full potential. However, it is also true for our educators and support staff to do this. They need to be in an environment that is absolutely therapeutic, safe and conducive to achieving the intended outcomes. We have a school estate which in many cases is old and crumbling, with very little in the way of new builds, and school maintenance over these past years has suffered as much due to the pandemic as any other area. And all of this is known, of course, but what have we done about it? It's not, in my opinion, the role of a principal or a board of governor to make an assessment about the adequacy and safety of ventilation and air quality in any room, let alone a classroom. It is not the responsibility of a principal or a board of governor to assess whether an air filter or air cleaner is required. In my opinion, it is the responsibility for the Minister for Education to ensure that resources exist to adequately assess the need and delivery of a ventilation strategy and equipment for every single classroom in the country as required. And whilst the immediacy of the need for ventilation is proven and well made, so too is the need for substitute teachers. It is good to read the stories from England where retired school teachers have been risen to the call and made themselves available to support schools as time has arisen. My time is now running wonderfully short, Mr. Speaker, so I'll just get to the last call, if that's okay. We've also learned of the absolute cornerstone that childcare is to the functioning of all sectors, including the education sector. I would also ask the Minister then today for an update on any work ongoing to ensure financial support is in place for the temporary closures of childcare facilities due to COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, I and the Ulster Unionist Party will be supporting today's motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Chris Little.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the opportunity to speak on this motion in support of COVID safety for everyone in our education sector, which reiterates calls for air quality and ventilation measures made by my colleague and Executive Minister Naomi Long in summer 2020, and action on staff shortage crises raised by every teaching union at the Education Committee in December. The education sector deserves no less, Mr Speaker, and the Alliance Party continues to thank everyone in our education sector in Northern Ireland for the courage and leadership they have shown to maintain good quality education for our children and young people throughout this pandemic, and we thank our children and young people for the sacrifices that they have made to keep so many of us safe during this pandemic. Mr Speaker, it is said by many people today that COVID-19 is a mild disease. And for many people, that may be correct, particularly those who seek vaccination. However, for others, COVID-19 continues to cause short and long-term sickness, hospitalisation and death. And it also continues to cause disruption to our schools, particularly in terms of that staff shortage crisis. I think it's important that we continue to listen to the children and young people affected by COVID-19 and indeed those in our education sector. I had the privilege of referring to a letter from Rosie Pigeon in East Belfast, aged 16, at the Education Committee. Mr Speaker, Rosie had mild COVID-19 symptoms, a bit of a temperature and a headache. 3 months after, the headache continued and has never gone away. She continues to suffer symptoms such as brain fog, pain, fatigue, insomnia, breathlessness, dizziness and a loss of taste. The 3 things she can taste are strawberries, salt and vinegar. She is not alone, Mr Speaker. Children have experienced long COVID. A study in the British Medical Journal found that 1 in 7 children who get COVID still have symptoms 15 weeks later. And the Office for National Statistics estimated in October 2021 that 1.2 million people in the UK have long COVID. Children like Rosie are asking this Assembly and the Minister for Education, what action are we taking to protect them? What action is being taken in relation to air quality and air filtration and other important measures? Mr Speaker, society is judged on how it treats its most vulnerable, how it treats children and young people. And the Northern Ireland Teaching Council have spoken clearly today to state that the mitigations currently in place in schools are not sufficient to meet the challenge of adequately protecting children and young people, and indeed those responsible for their care. School leaders and teachers are struggling in circumstances where staff absences arising from COVID-19 is making it impossible for many schools to function in a safe manner. We need to take action. The priority must be to keep schools open safely, and indeed early education and childcare open safely, and we need to see a reinstatement of that childcare temporary closure fund and indeed a reopening of other financial assistance. Schools and childcare are vital for children. They're vital to our way of life. That has been exposed in stark view during the pandemic. We must do everything we can to maintain their safe opening. Expedited leadership on vaccination has had a significant success in limiting the impact of COVID-19. We ought to be expediting research, scoping and costing and delivery on ventilation. Yes, personal responsibility on hands, face and space. Yes, vaccination are having a significant impact on limiting COVID-19, but there is more we can do. An investment in clean air could be vitally important to limiting the impact of COVID-19. The Northern Ireland Teaching Council have called for guidance on CO2 monitors, for investment in air filtration and for more robust contact tracing. I hope the Education Minister can take this opportunity today to reassure this Assembly, children, families and everyone in our education sector that there is a plan in place to deliver these mitigations that will also achieve safe education for everyone in Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Padraig Delargy.
Minister, in preparation for this debate, I decided to go through some of the correspondence that I've had from my constituents since taking up this role in September. There were 263 parents, teachers and classroom assistants who had contacted me with deep concerns about the lack of preventative strategies to curb the spread of COVID. As members of this Assembly, our role is to convey the opinions and the concerns of our constituents. In my constituency, as in many others across the north, there is alarm, there's worry and there's despair. So most recently, the worries have focused on the lack of ventilation. And I've heard several comments here and in the lead up to this debate, ranging from minimising the need for ventilation right up to dispelling it. Let me refer the Minister to evidence from a teacher in one of my local schools. I noted today, the coldest day so far on return to school, that the monitor read 1018 ppm at 12:50. At this time of the day, the children had left the room 20 minutes previous to go to the playground. All windows and doors were open, and I had returned to the room. So in 20 minutes, the reading was still well over the recommended level, despite the room being ventilated and absolutely freezing. Not a suitable environment for me, for the other assistants in the class, or for the 23 children. I want to put another piece of evidence from a pupil who I met on Friday. On a recent visit, she told me that she was petrified of bringing COVID home to her grandmother. Children in our schools have heightened anxiety and are sitting in a state of worry. I also was contacted by several principals who noted that their heating costs have soared due to open windows, open doors, because of the lack of air filtration. This is adding further pressure to an already stretched budget. Minister, it would be remiss of me not to note that in this correspondence there are broader trends. There are trends of indecisiveness, trends of a lack of communication, and of a lack of transparency. The failure to deliver this proper ventilation compounds the pressure of the lack of substitute teachers, advice on exams, and contact tracing queries. The latter all remain unsolved. And I recognise that ventilation is one of a number of measures which must be used in tandem to reduce the risk of outbreaks in our schools. Ventilation forms an intrinsic part of this battle, particularly in primary and in special needs environments where children are not required to wear masks. I can tell you, as someone who worked in a school last year, that this is not the best way for our children to learn. It's not presenting opportunities for our children to thrive. Last year, the lack of air filtration systems was due to their lack of availability, or their perceived lack of availability. And schools remained open on the goodwill of teachers and of the school's staff. This was done with the goodwill of the staff, parents and pupils, with rigorous planning of principals and of school caretakers. What's frustrating and unjust is that this year they are available, but the Minister has made a conscious decision to deny them to our schools. Everyone here wants our schools to remain open. We want children to have the best education available to them. And Minister, the solution is simple. Ventilation is a simple but effective manner of curbing transmission of COVID in our schools. But the message being sent out by the Minister and by the Department is that you simply don't care. Because while children and teachers have sat in our classrooms in freezing cold conditions, you have sat on your hands.
Sorry, point of order.
For the second time, can you, Mr. Speaker, remind members opposite that remarks are to be directed through the chair?
I'll start that point again.
On a general point, general reminder to all members, speak through the chair, please.
Minister, it is simple. The solution is simple, and I would tell the Minister that. To lower the transmission of COVID in our schools, the message sent out by the Minister and by the Department is that they simply don't care. Because while the Minister has not made these decisions, our schools remain open. This has not been sprung on the Minister, it has not been sprung on the Department. Sinn Féin, along with other parties, have continuously called for proper ventilation for months. And I have still heard no clear rationale, no clear reason why this hasn't already happened.
Thank you. And I call Diane Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Mr Speaker, in preparation for this debate and as part of an ongoing engagement within my constituency, I spoke to a very wide range of schools in Upper Bann over the past week. And a number of recurring themes came forward from this engagement, and I'm going to refer to those recurring themes today. But first of all, Mr Speaker, one of the things that I think we must acknowledge is that schools are a bedrock of our society. They offer opportunity, not just academic opportunity, but opportunities for building character and for well-being. And for many of our children and young people, school is a safe place, a sanctuary. School is a place where they can socialise freely without fear. A place where some can receive the only hot meal of the day, and a place where some can escape very difficult family circumstances. So, Mr Speaker, one of the most important recurring themes that came from my engagement over the last number of days was the absolute necessity expressed by teachers and school leaders that we must keep schools open. And that was magnified by one school leader who teaches in a very large sixth form college in Portadown, where she indicated that many of the mental health problems, the problems of anxiety, the feelings of loneliness that many young people have experienced is as a result of schools not being open. And when I mean schools being open, Mr Speaker, I don't mean schools being open to transmit remote learning. I mean schools being open for face-to-face teaching. And I think that there is some sleight of hand being played by some in relation to this particular issue. And of course, in the fact that we need schools to be open, Mr Speaker, it's important to pay tribute to the determination and the leadership of schools and of teachers in very, very challenging times. But, Mr Speaker, another of the issues that came across very, very clearly was the issues around staffing in schools. And if a teacher was out with a COVID, then that was a particular problem. And I know the Minister has looked at this particular issue, and there is no quick or easy fix in relation to this. And perhaps maybe one of the things that we're not focusing on is that the success of the Engage programme has actually meant that many of those who would be on the substitute teacher list are actually teaching in schools full-time. But there has been some kind of reference that surely our final year education students at Stranmillis, St Mary's, Ulster could suddenly go into school and take the place of those teachers. And I think we do have to be very careful and very fair to those young students who have already had much of their higher education experience disrupted because of COVID. And to drop them into a difficult situation, I think would be very challenging for them as well. Yes, of course I will.
Appreciate the member for giving way. Does she also appreciate this idea that the Department for Education is stuffed full of qualified teachers that can be simply moved from desk jobs? It's the sort of logic that says that DAERA must be stuffed full of farmers or infrastructure must be stuffed full of bus drivers. There's absolutely no proof in terms of that there's this vast supply of teachers in the Department for Education that can be moved from their desk and into schools.
Member has an additional minute.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Of course that is right, and I think of course we need to exercise some sense of proportion in relation to this, Mr Speaker. There are tens of thousands of teachers in Northern Ireland, and the numbers that anything like this would produce would be absolutely minuscule in comparison to the number of teachers that are there. So, Mr Speaker, teachers are experiencing difficulties, and they are having really challenging times. But the schools that I have been speaking to are emphasising that they will do anything that they can do with the help of the department and the minister to ensure that their schools stay open. Mr. Speaker, there's also been a lot of conversation and in this debate today around the guidance that has been transmitted to schools. And I think we should remember that the Department of Education is the Department of Education. It is for the Department of Health, the Minister for Health, and indeed the Chief Medical Officer and Chief Scientific Officer to give guidance in relation to health issues in school. And I note that our Chief Scientific Officer recently said that schools are safe and that schools need to keep open because of the societal harms that happen when schools are closed. I've also heard, Mr. Speaker, in the debate, and indeed it came up...
Member's time's up.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the member for her forbearance. Can I call Mervyn Storey? Mervyn Storey.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You caught me unawares. I thought it was going to go to somebody else there. First of all, can I declare an interest as a member of the Board of Governors of the William Pinkerton School in Dervick and also Ballymoney High School? And can I also take this opportunity to welcome the comments of my party colleague Diane Dodds and take this opportunity publicly for us in this chamber today to condemn the outrageous and horrific online abuse that has been heaped upon my colleague, and I wish those well in investigating this, that whoever was responsible will be brought to book and will be brought before the courts, and we all as a House should stand today in condemnation. Mr. Speaker, no one should be surprised that we're here today. Not because of the continuing spread of the Omicron COVID variant or the subsequent challenges that it brings, but because it seems that there are parties in this Assembly who are only interested in a quick headline or the display of political opportunism at its very worst. I have listened to members opposite, and they are talking about care and consideration. Well, if they had care and consideration, they would have been working with the Minister, with the Executive, to ensure that now that they've all become experts, that those issues would have been addressed and they would have been discussed. Yes, I will.
A simple point. You say about the members opposite, but would you remember that it's the members opposite and right the way round to beside you, because all other parties in here are coming from the same perspective, and as has been mentioned before, don't try to tribalise this and make it out to be some sort of political debate. It's all parties, right the way round to beside yourself there.
Member has an additional minute.
Well, thank you for the extra minute. Maybe I've missed something, but maybe I've missed the fact that there were members in this House didn't sign the recall. So there are issues in relation to the party political politics that's being played. But despite all the rhetoric of working together and the benefits of the local executive, all we get from parties in this House is proof, if any proof was needed, that a five-party coalition only exists in name or when it suits the parties to use the executive as cover for something that it is not really entirely supportive of. Maybe today what we all need to do is return to the classroom and be reminded of some important lessons. In doing so, we might discover who really has been sitting on their hands. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, at the outset, we all, as a House, and taking the point that the member has made, we give our appreciation and thanks to the staff in our schools, to our parents and to everybody who has been challenged at this particular time and over the last number of years in relation to the challenges of coronavirus. The motion commences with the support for keeping our schools open, as does the amendment that wasn't accepted by the SDLP, as does all the comments that we've heard today from the Alliance Party and others in this House about the importance of keeping our schools open. I think that's to be welcome, because it sits with almost a sense of irony that Sinn Féin are now expressing such support for keeping our schools open when they didn't take the same approach previously, and they used every means possible and every opportunity possible at previous stages of the pandemic to slow and to disrupt the plans to reopen the schools. So maybe the lesson that the party opposite has learned, Sinn Féin, in this particular issue, is that they actually do listen to the concerns of people out there, rather than always jumping on to the political hobby horse. But then, of course, another element of school is it tells us about the importance of language. And when we use words, those words, we should at least have the sense to accept that when we use words such as reckless or irresponsible, which we've heard a lot about in the last number of days, you would expect then that the party that would accuse others of being reckless and irresponsible wouldn't be engaged in the same thing. Not so the party of Sinn Féin, because they would like us to forget that for 3 years they were reckless and irresponsible in their absenteeism from these institutions, which hadn't at the heart a concern for parents, which hadn't at the heart a concern for children, but only was concerned, Mr. Speaker, about their own political agenda. And of course, maybe they would like us also to forget about the reckless and irresponsible and total disregard to the COVID regulations when they were more interested in the burial of one of their colleagues in public display in the streets of Belfast. But maybe that has now all been forgotten. But there was no apology, there was no remorse, and there was no concern for the spread of COVID when that was an issue in society. Mr. Speaker, a lot of talk has been here this morning, I want to very quickly do this, about air filtration. All of a sudden we've now become experts. Well, I have to say, if we're going to all become experts, so will I. And I will put into the mix a company in my constituency, Illumex, who actually deal in sterilisation, not in air filtration. There is a difference, and if the members want, I'm quite happy to supply them, along with the Minister, a paper that was produced on that issue, but it comes at a cost. And it's time for the Finance Minister to come up with the money.
Thank the member, and I call Colin McGrath.
Very much, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to participate in this debate today, because as we've made our way through this pandemic, it's schools that have been among the worst that have been hit. And as our restrictions have changed, as they've been eased or they've been tightened, it's our pupils, it's their parents, it's the principals and the staff in the schools who have had to adapt at a minute's notice. And we pay our respects to them and the work that they have done in very difficult circumstances. But it would appear that it has been successive education ministers who have learned the least from this experience. The situation in our schools is perilous now. It's perilous. The ventilation of classrooms and school buildings is essential. The minimising of contact is essential. I am a member of the Health Committee, and we have heard from a range of experts about the transmissibility of the current variant, and about the need for social distancing and the need to keep ventilation top of the agenda. We have been told by successive presenters to our committee, from the Minister, be it the Chief Medical and Scientific Officers right the way down, that the spreading of the virus, preventing the spread of the virus, is what will save our health service and support our tired and weary, but nonetheless heroes on the front line of our health service. But when it comes to schools, it's practically business as usual. And I find that difficult to comprehend. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that we should be closing the schools. I'm simply saying, like every other sector in society, there should be precautions, and that the delivery of those precautions requires leadership. And I ask, where is that leadership? And I think of the necessary air filtration systems that schools need. Why have these not been requested? Some schools are actually providing them themselves, while others are keeping their windows open to offer that ventilation. Well, I think if you look outside the window, you'll see that we're not in California or in stretches of Australia. We're in places where whenever you open the windows all day, children are sitting in very cold situations and in some instances are having to put on coats, jumpers and extra layers just to be able to get comfortably through the day. I'd appreciate the extra minute.
Will I accept that we're in a chamber today? There's no ventilation. Air conditioning's off, can't use it. So I think it's time that we started to practice what we preach. And secondly, will he also accept that if we do this in if we do this in education, we'll have to do it for all the public sector, and return to work is a big challenge.
And I would just simply ask the member to go to any classroom and look up and see if he goes 2 or 3 stories before you hit the roof, which is also something that is often taken into consideration whenever you're doing the various plans that you're doing for safety. The height of the ceiling is a big consideration, and my goodness, it's a long way up to the top of there compared to most classrooms. But then we have a finance minister that says that he can't give the money until it's been asked for. And I think that cuts deep to the dysfunctionality that we have in certain places in the executive and what we have been subjected to for the last 15 years. It's silo working, silo mentality, and only delivering to their silos. Now, surely our children, surely our school staff and their families deserve better than this. And of course, there are other sectors that are impacted as well. I'm sure many over the last 24 hours have been receiving information from childminders as another group, and how they are being impacted when there is the provision of care for children, that they are suffering because of the massive amounts of sickness that there is in that sector, and how they feel that they haven't been given the adequate support as well. And I'll also, just because I always do, there's a youth service that's out there. The youth service is delivering, but it also has to bring lots and lots of young people from different backgrounds into the same space, and they should be considered in any help or assistance that there is as well. Mr. Speaker, just before Christmas, I had pupils from the Holy Cross Primary School from Attic-Hall in my constituency here in Stormont. And they were eager to raise issues, to ask questions, and to know what we were doing about matters in their local area. And it was a pleasure to meet them. But how do we tell these children that the reason why their education is in peril at the moment is because some political parties won't grow up and get their act together and work in partnership to resolve the issues and solve the problems that they face? Do we have to tell these children that there are certain parties that are willing to prioritise and politicise the political gains rather than the health and safety in the classroom? Those children and young people deserve better than the perilous position that they are being left in. We need joined-up action from the Education and the Finance Minister. We need a long-term strategy for our schools, and if it's not forthcoming, then those parties will have lost whatever shred of credibility that they might have once had. So let's do the right thing. Let's stop embarrassing yourselves. Let's grow up, and let's get our schools fixed up, safe, and have them delivering for our children. Thank you.
Okay, and I call Jim Allister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first thing that strikes me about this motion, and I think it leads through maybe to what is the predominant purpose of the motion, is the appalling absence from it of any acknowledgement or recognition of the hugely dedicated work of those who keep our schools going. As the chairman of a Board of Governors, I know just what the last year has been like for staff, and for not just teaching staff, but for all staff. And yet here we come to debate this issue, and not a word in this motion of recognising the sacrifice and the efforts made. Yes?
I'm grateful to the member for giving way, and I've sat through the entirety of this debate. Has the member also noticed that the one thing that has been absent from all of those arguing in favour of this motion is any notion of how much this will cost the department should it become policy?
Member hasn't this a minute.
I will come to that. It's quite clear to me that this recall and this motion is and was a stunt. Nothing more than that. We had the similar situation in September. Didn't make any difference. Nor will this. But of course, the primary message of this motion, signed by 3 parties of the executive, is to cause me to remind this House that these three parties are in the executive. This is the executive which they are part, that they are now tearing apart when it comes to one of those departments. What we are seeing, of course, is the dying months of the disintegration of this executive and the dysfunctionalism that's writ large over the very bringing of this motion brings that point home. I also have to say this, that some of the people who brought this motion today are the very same people who couldn't get our schools closed quick enough, who campaigned and lobbied and agitated to close the schools, who campaigned and lobbied and agitated to cancel exams. And now we're supposed to believe that the motivation here is pure. It's about the interests of our children. Well, you can't have it both ways. Just as Mr. Sheehan couldn't have it both ways the other morning on Good Morning Ulster, when he boldly asserted that the Finance Minister was ready to pay whatever it took to provide these filtration systems, and then within 60 seconds had vote fast to say, no, 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 I can't say that. And of course that brings us to the heart of the issue. What is the cost? What is the efficacy of these systems? Are there alternatives? Where does it fit in the context of how many school children are in fact being hospitalised with COVID? Because I notice, for example, our ICU levels are static, essentially, despite the rise in transmission. And I think it is common case that the symptoms within the school age limit are, thankfully, relatively modest. But what is the cost? Who is going to pay for it? How is it going to be paid? Because we have a finance minister who's told the Education Department for the next 3 years it's a 2% cut. And then with the party of that minister saying, go find the money to pay for these things. And as someone pointed out earlier, once you establish this precedent within school workplaces, won't the same demand be logically made for every workplace? And what is that costing? So I think once more we're in a free slide of easy-made demands without any appreciation or any consideration of who pays for it and what it would cost and what you would have to go without in order to supply this. So I think those who bring a motion such as this need to do better. They need to come with a reasoned, costed argument as to how, if we do this, we're going to pay for it, what the knock-on consequences are, rather than simply say, this is what we want, somebody else go and do it. That's not really the way to conduct responsible politics. But that, sadly, in this disintegrating executive, is how things seem to work, or not work.
I get a call, Jerry Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To say that the Minister has managed COVID in schools abysmally would be to put it mildly. Week after week, we're hearing of rising cases of COVID in schools, teachers and workers having to isolate as COVID spreads throughout our schools, pupils having to withdraw from school and isolate and losing out on important education and socialising with their peers. And we've had an approach from the Minister which basically amounts to continue on as normal. Nothing to see here, even though we're in a pandemic that we are told governments will do unprecedented things. Graham Galt of the National Association of Head Teachers has also raised his concern about contact tracing and how it's been implemented, and also the staff in crisis. Schools who were already under pressure with not enough staff before COVID are now feeling the pressure even more as staff are developing symptoms and having to self-isolate. He, alongside many others, have warned about the lack of contingency plans put in place by this Minister. It's not like you couldn't see this coming. The Joint Negotiating Council of Education Union reps stated to the Minister in August of this year, and I quote, "Unless urgent action is taken, more children will become sick or need to isolate and lose out face-to-face teaching." And they went on to say, and I quote, "All possible practical steps should be taken now to avoid the chaos of this year being repeated." Those steps were not taken. And the Minister may no doubt say that this is a challenging period, and no doubt it is for those on the front line trying to teach and educate, whilst also trying to navigate this virus. But it's approaching 2 years, Mr Speaker, since this virus has been on our shores. This Minister, or any Minister, cannot use the excuse of novelty any longer. The truth is, the solutions have been known for some time, but they have not been implemented by this Minister or the Executive. One of the main ways to reduce transmission of the virus and to protect people's health and in-person teaching is to ensure there is proper ventilation in school settings. The Minister has failed on a number of fronts in this regard. There is no current law to set out minimum standard for clean air in schools. People are being failed and placed in danger. CO2 monitors, as we have heard, are not being installed in every school across the north. The Minister has failed again. Despite record number of cases in schools and the community, the Minister did not push for implementing a circuit breaker before Christmas in schools, and there's no monitoring of long COVID and thousands of education workers who've been affected as well. The effect being, let the virus rip at all costs, regardless of the long-term health impact on education workers. And if this wasn't bad enough, Mr Speaker, the Minister has returned £40 million to the Finance Minister of unspent money to protect pupils and staff in schools. Cataclysmic failure once again. Picture that. Cases are shooting through the roof, worry and anxiety is at record levels, and rather than using the money to ensure schools are as safe, as practical and possible, the Minister returns money unspent. It's a bit like your house being on fire and chasing away the fire brigade from your door saying, "We don't need you." It's not good enough that the only option for children is to have COVID ripped through the classroom, or to be stuck in a freezing classroom, or to have no in-person education at all. My party in the South have introduced a workplace ventilation bill, giving all workers the right to clean air, and puts the onus on employers to supply this. If our party can do it, then why can't the DUP and this Minister? And if there are rules and action in place to breach food safety rules, then why not for workplaces that breach safe, clean air and put people at risk? There's been some talk about a pan-nationalist front today. For me, the DUP are deploying the same old tactic here when they're tanking in the polls, or the Minister is rightly under criticism. Blame the bogey Fenian, the pan-nationalist front, or whatever else. Whatever it is sectarian deflection, and it needs called out. So I'm not part of any imaginary front, Mr Speaker, but I'm happy to support the motion today.
I thank the member, and just to make a point that in accordance with Standing Order 17(4), the Business Committee and myself have agreed previously to allow some flexibility to go beyond the time limit for the duration of time debates, as there are still a number of members who wish to speak, and I want to accommodate them this morning, but they wouldn't be able to be accommodated within the original time, and so we are going to grant a grace period of 15 minutes now. That means that all remaining speakers will therefore have 2 minutes to speak, and no additional time will be allocated if any interventions are accepted. That's unfortunate, but that's the guarantee that everybody who wants to speak will be able to speak. So, on that basis, I call Christopher Stalford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'll be very brief. As I said earlier, not one person who has spoken in favour of this motion has indicated to us what the budgetary allocation would be, and it's the height of irresponsibility. No, it's the height of irresponsibility to pass motions and then say it's the Minister's responsibility to go away and find out how much our flights of fancy are going to cost the department. And yet that's precisely what we're being expected. And yet that is precisely what they're playing at today. What we've witnessed over the course of the last few days is nothing more than rank showboating and political posturing, both from the SDLP and from Sinn Féin. This is particularly ironic in the context of a Sinn Féin Finance Minister imposing cuts upon the Department for Education, to then be making demands upon the Minister at that department to find additional funds is just outrageous. In relation to the issue of HEPA ventilation systems, these have been held up to the public as some sort of panacea to solve the problem, the outrageous problem and situation of children being in cold classrooms. But the people who bring this motion know, or at least they should know before they authored it, that the windows in classrooms will have to remain open in order to allow a HEPA filtration system to work. So to go onto the media and onto the radio and try to sell people the nonsense that has been attempted over the last few days in relation to HEPA filters is simply irresponsible. I want to finish my remarks by thanking teachers, groundskeepers, cleaners, the lollipop ladies and men who keep our schools open. And I want to say that I welcome the newfound commitment of the parties opposite who couldn't get schools closed quick enough to keeping them open. And I hope that failure to implement these measures is not, for their part, some precursor to demanding the closure of our schools at some point in the future.
Thank the member, and I call Mike Nesbitt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I declare an interest as Chair of the Board of Movilla High School in Newton Ards, and actually the issue at Movilla today is not one of ventilation, it's one of heating. And if any member knows anything about central heating boilers, there's a free school dinner in it for you. Mr. Speaker, like you, I'm conscious that there may be members of the public tuned into this debate, and I don't think we should feed the narrative that we're all wasters and that devolution is useless. Which is not to say we shouldn't scrutinise the department. There are valid questions. Is there a plan? Is it appropriate? Is it being delivered in a timely manner? And I look forward to the Minister's remarks. But, Mr. Speaker, if the proverbial man or woman from Mars had just arrived and was watching this debate, do you think they would twig that the DUP and Sinn Féin are partners? That in this year of 2022, this is the 15th year in a row they have been given the role of leading from the executive table down in Stormont Castle. I think it would be timely to remember that our system of government is consociational. In other words, to put it crudely, once the election's over and the votes have been counted, any party that takes its place at that table ceases to be a rival and should become partners. Partners in delivery for our schools, for our businesses, for our hospitals, for our people. I'm not seeing a great deal of sign of that today, Mr. Speaker. I look forward to the Minister's comments.
I'm going to call Kelly Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I declare an interest as a member of the Board of Governors of Strangford College and Portaferry Integrated Primary School. Mr. Speaker, I'll not use up too much of my time today talking around these issues. Like previous Speaker, I want to see solutions. So what I'll ask simply is that the Northern Ireland Teachers Council and NASUWT are listened to when they say that school leaders and teachers are struggling due to staff shortages. And I look forward to hearing what the Minister has to say on that. Ventilation is one of the key tools needed if we are to keep schools open, which I fully support that we do. But the solution presented by some is mechanical ventilation. Over recess, we have heard from the Department of Finance that no bid for such ventilation has been submitted, and I ask the Minister to clarify if this is true. I would ask, Mr. Speaker, that we think about uniforms. It is not good enough to say that each school should be putting down their own uniform policy. I would look forward and ask the Minister to consider to make an announcement to allow children shivering in classrooms be permitted to wear whatever they need to keep warm. Keeping schools open is not just important for physical learning, but also for the mental health of our students. Students are worried about a return to remote learning. In fact, we've heard today that some have returned to remote learning. And students have said today on radio that they are concerned for their safety in schools. I am concerned for these pupils, and I ask that clarification is provided for pupils and their teachers about what's going to happen with exams. Today, school leaders have been told that the Engage 2 programme may be used flexibly. Mr. Speaker, is this robbing Peter to pay Paul? Engage 2 is supposed to provide support for students that need extra help. If those staff are redeployed, then what happens to the children who are availing of that support? Are they to be left behind? What does this say about what we think about children with special education needs? If teachers, unions, students and parents are saying they need a plan, then it's time for a transparent plan with clarification to be provided. I support the call for a plan and that the safety of our pupils and our staff is put first, and I support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole. Peter Weir.
It does seem that in terms of political stunts, this is very much a case of plus ça change, plus ça même chose. There is, and there has been throughout this pandemic, planning has gone on through the Department of Education, and whether it's myself or the current Minister, And that has been one that's been very much in step with the advice that's been given by public health and by the health department. Indeed, at times that sometimes has meant that in terms of where we want to reach in terms of education has been frustrating. Sometimes it has taken us in a direction, ideally, that from a purely educational point of view we didn't want to go, and also in a situation where changes have had to be made. But every step along the way, it has been in step with what the Department of Health has advised. And in current circumstances, if guidance, for instance, has not changed over the Christmas period, it is because the health guidance has not changed. And it does seem that there are some in this House who see themselves as amateur virologists, who seem to suggest that they know better than the Department of Health or the Chief Medical Officer. I mean, would they prefer that the Minister went on a solo run as regards the advice that is being given? And indeed, in terms of keeping in step with what health has asked for, I wish some of the parties here had done likewise, because mention has been made about the rush to close schools at the start of this pandemic, at a time when two of the parties within this chamber were voting to close schools, when it was opposed by the Chief Medical Officer and opposed by the Department of Health. Second point I wish to make in terms of the issue of the filtration systems. Indeed, even the professor who is in charge of doing the tests on these have said that there's no guarantee that in terms of the real world that actually deliver what they are supposed to deliver, that needs to be evidence-based within that. SAGE themselves have indicated there's a very limited benefit, and that indeed it is not a substitute for ventilation, i.e. the windows would have to be open throughout. It does seem that there are some members who regard themselves as more SAGE than SAGE itself.
Thank you. And I call Justin McNulty.
Happy New Year to you and to everyone here and to everyone out there. Thank you, teachers, school staff, principals, and all support staff for your enormous efforts and for continuing going despite the pressure and duress you've been under and significant risk to your health and your family's health. 35,000 people signed our petition, Minister. 35,000 people raising concerns about the safety of schools and especially in relation to contact tracing. Minister, the bringer of that petition, Suzanne Kelly, deserves a response. She deserves a response out of simple courtesy. Questions. How many schools have received air filtration systems, and are those systems impacting on the transmissibility of this virus? What's the cost of those filtration systems? What's the cost of implementing them? And what's the cost of not implementing them? Downstream, what's the cost to our health service in terms of the waiting lists in our GPs, in terms of the pressures on our emergency departments? What's the downstream impact of not putting filtration systems in classrooms? In relation to our special teachers, our special schools, I want to pay an enormous tribute to our special teachers and special schools, especially given the heightened risks involved there, because close contact cannot be avoided in many of those environments. And those teachers to keep those schools open, for those staff to keep those schools open, for the parents, for the children, it's been incredible. Keep going, keep going. Where are we on exams? Where are we on exams? Are the mitigations you're putting in place for every child fair for every child? Fair for children who have special needs, fair for children who are stipended, fair for children who have any sort of learning difficulty? Are the mitigations fair for them? And do they help to support children from deprived or socially deprived backgrounds? Will the exams proposals be fair? And there's no algorithm for this, Minister. There's no algorithm for this fairness, with fairness we need. Minister, what are your plans in place for sport and physical education? The whole system is connected. Physically, we're connected to our mental health, to our emotional health, our spiritual health. Minister, what are our plans for PE, for physical activity for children in our schools?
Time's up. Thank you, Nick. And I call Stuart Dixon.
Mr. Speaker, I've listened with interest to the debate today, and particularly around the concerns that it is very important that we keep our children and young people in schools and that we do that safely. And that's what I want to hear from the Minister today, how her plans have evolved to keep young people in school and to keep them and all of the staff working with them safe. We're told that ventilation is vitally important in that particular aspect. Therefore, it's unacceptable that classroom windows are wide open in the middle of the winter, that young people are having to put additional clothes on, teachers, and I have a family member who's a teacher who has to wear a coat in her classroom. That's the choice that you have to stay warm and to do your job during the day. We've heard a lot of scientific experts around this chamber making reference to filtration of the air. The whole purpose of opening a window is to exchange the air in the room. There are other methods of doing that. Quite simply, old-fashioned vent axia type electric fans installed in windows are a very cheap and a very low-tech solution to actually dealing with this problem, where it is not practical to have the windows open or where it's extremely cold in the classroom. We're told repeatedly in television advertisements and by scientific officers it's about exchanging the air in the room. It's not necessarily about filtering the air in the room. It's about getting a change of air in the room, and that can be achieved by other means, other mechanical means. Quite often the low-tech solution is the best solution. What I want to hear from the Minister today, Mr Speaker, is what planning has been done over a long period of time to assess every single classroom in Northern Ireland. Can we see the spreadsheet that sets out classroom with windows open and an acceptable temperature can be achieved, classrooms where the windows cannot be opened, classrooms where the windows can be opened but an acceptable temperature cannot be achieved? Let's have a look at the data and let's just see what she and her officials have been doing to achieve this in order to provide for education for all of our young people right across Northern Ireland. Thank you.
I thank the member for that. Thank all the members who have contributed so far. And I now call the Minister of Education, Michelle McIlveen, and the Minister has 15 minutes to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to respond to today's motion. At the outset, I would like to address parents across Northern Ireland, and I want you to know that I treat my responsibility for your children with the utmost gravity. Their safety and well-being is the top priority for me and my department. It informs every decision I make. Regrettably, today's motion represents quick fixes, easy headlines and the worst form of politics. In the midst of the most severe pandemic in living memory, we must not play politics with our children's education. My strategy and that of the Executive is and has always been clear. I've had a comprehensive plan in place since autumn to address the challenges presented by the Omicron variant. To suggest otherwise is just wrong. My department and I are guided at all times by the advice of the Department of Health and the Public Health Agency. Before the beginning of term, we put in place our COVID guidance framework, developed in close conjunction with the Department of Health, the Public Health Agency and school practitioners. It's a framework for living with COVID to reduce risk whilst enabling schools to function as fully as possible in order to provide high-quality education to our children and young people. It is also a framework which empowers our school leaders to make the right decisions for their school community and their own unique context. They are best placed to identify how their school can operate effectively, supported and advised by the EA, CCMS and COVID-19 link officers. Our measures to reduce transmission in schools mirror those across wider society and include good hand hygiene, good natural ventilation, a twice-weekly asymptomatic testing programme, use of face coverings in post-primary schools, consistent groups where possible, vaccination for all staff and pupils aged 12 and over, provision of CO2 monitors and reducing contacts. No single measure is the magic bullet, but this range of mitigations work together collectively to reduce risk as much as possible. Unlike other jurisdictions, we have kept in place mitigations such as face coverings, one-way systems and consistent groups throughout the autumn term. As we have throughout this pandemic, we respond immediately to any changes in public health advice. And I reiterate to this Assembly, no recommendations have been made by the Department of Health to the Executive to introduce further mitigations or restrictions in education settings. Indeed, at the Health Committee last week, the Chief Medical Officer advised it is really important that there is a doubling down of the baseline mitigations that Northern Ireland schools, DE and EA have maintained throughout the pandemic. There is no magic one thing that can be put in place in schools other than a continued focus on all those things that work. I'd like to turn to the issue of ventilation and air filtration devices referenced in this motion. All the scientific and public health advice stresses natural ventilation. Nothing is more effective than opening windows and doors. My department's COVID guidance provides schools with detailed advice on managing ventilation. This motion portrays air filters as the magic solution to ending COVID transmission in schools. This is oversimplistic and in no way reflects the complexity of the issue. At a conservative estimate, it would cost around £40 million to install them across 20,000 classrooms.
If the evidence supports such investment, I will have no hesitation in bidding for such funds to the Executive and the Minister of Finance. However, I will not move ahead of the evidence and recklessly spend public money. We must follow the science. The UK Government Scientific Advisory Group on Emergencies, SAGE, has concluded, and I quote, "There is currently very little evidence that air cleaners are an effective control to prevent COVID-19. However, the principles of air cleaning suggest that they may be useful in some cases. I must stress at this point the scientific evidence regarding the effectiveness of air cleaners is inconclusive. SAGE also recommends that air cleaners should never be used as a substitute for ventilation." This is a highly technical area, and I have therefore written to the Health Minister to ask for the Chief Scientific Advisor's views on the merits of air cleaners to prevent COVID-19 and, in particular, HEPA filters. The University of Leeds is leading a government-funded trial into the use of air cleaning technologies in school settings. My department will consider its findings, along with any advice received from the Chief Scientific Advisor and SAGE, in taking evidence-based decisions on the wider installation of air filtration units within classrooms. I recognise that ventilation is an issue of concern to our schools. Much of our schools' estate requires urgent capital investment. As an interim measure, I am investing over £2 million this year on ventilation works, and this includes £1 million to replace old and defective windows, £1 million for CO2 monitors, and to date, 11,500 monitors have been deployed alongside detailed guidance on their use, and a further 5,000 are due for delivery. We have ordered an initial 100 air filtration units which can be deployed quickly to where they are needed. If a room is identified with a low level of ventilation, schools should contact the EA Maintenance Help Desk, and a maintenance officer will attend the school within 24 hours. Since CO2 monitors were delivered to schools before Christmas, the EA Maintenance Help Desk has received 19 calls from schools seeking assistance in relation to ventilation. EA has attended 16 schools to assess the situation and arrange for any remedial works to be undertaken, including, where appropriate, use of an air cleaning unit. Turning to school staffing, I share the concerns voiced by a number of members about the staffing pressures that schools are currently experiencing and the likelihood that these will intensify. I fully recognise the disruption this is causing to many schools and also to families, where some schools have had to move some pupils to remote learning for a short period. We must recognise this is a difficult issue and one many businesses and employers across Northern Ireland are also facing. We have to be realistic and recognise that there is no ready and easy solution to staffing shortages in schools. There is no magic tap of teachers and other staff to turn on. So, as part of my strategic approach to addressing the Omicron impact, my officials have worked with the EA and CCMS to put in place contingency actions. Before Christmas, I wrote to recently retired teachers, appealing to them to consider returning to teaching in the short term. Over 100 retired teachers have responded to date by registering on the Northern Ireland Substitute Teachers Register. Part-time teaching and non-teaching staff have also been making themselves available for additional days and hours in order to address the staffing pressures in schools. I wrote to schools this morning to notify them that substitute teachers currently being used to deliver the Engage 2 programme can be allowed to cover staff absences in their school in order to maintain face-to-face teaching if other options to get substitute cover have been exhausted. My department is also exploring whether qualified teachers that work in the wider education sector could provide additional teaching capacity. Educational sectoral bodies have been asked to identify qualified teaching staff in their organisations that could be deployed in the short term to support schools with acute staffing pressures, and I'm expecting this information to be provided in the coming days. However, we again have to focus on the realities of the situation. Qualified teaching staff working in these organisations are doing important work in meeting statutory responsibilities and supporting schools and individual pupils, including pupils with special educational needs. Therefore, we need to balance the benefits of redeployment to schools against any detrimental impacts on the support provided to vulnerable pupils and schools. I do not know where claims of desktops desk jobs come from, teachers in EA, CCMS and other support organisations are the very COVID-19 link officers providing vital frontline support to our school leaders. My department has also explored with the higher education institutions and the student representative bodies whether final year student teachers could be deployed as substitute teachers and classroom assistants. The majority of student teachers are already scheduled to undertake school placements between now and early April. Under normal circumstances, students must be supervised by a qualified teacher throughout their placement. Nonetheless, in recognition of the pressures schools are now facing, it is proposed that where students are willing and school principals assess it to be appropriate, final year students might operate for extended periods in any day without direct supervision. This approach could potentially see up to 550 existing teachers released from a supervisory role and able to be redeployed within their school. There are a number of issues, including insurance indemnity, to be addressed before this new arrangement can be implemented, and I hope to be able to confirm this enhanced flexibility within the next few days. My department is monitoring the staffing situation in schools closely. We have put in place a daily staffing survey and a weekly survey on remote learning to provide the necessary information. At the beginning of the pandemic, my department launched a volunteering scheme to support our schools to provide educational supervision for vulnerable children and children of key workers. The scheme was very successful, with over 1,000 volunteers. The volunteering scheme is a further contingency to be deployed if necessary, and my officials are currently refreshing the database. And I speak directly to our school leaders and teachers and pay tribute to their leadership and professionalism in these testing times. Never before has our education system witnessed such disruption. 2 periods of extended school closures, the cancellation of public exams, and the need to develop new ways of teaching our young people remotely. Your work and that of your school staff has been outstanding, but I know that you're weary. You've been at the front line supporting our children and young people throughout this pandemic for nearly 2 years. I'm committed to reducing the burden on school leaders and teachers. Given the intense staffing pressures at present and the additional workload associated with performance review and staff development for teacher appraisal, I'm pleased to announce that this process will be paused for the current academic year. Inspection also continues to be paused, and I've also asked my officials to suspend all arrangements for key stage assessment and to again relax reporting arrangements to parents. The Education and Training Inspectorate has also postponed all monitoring visits that were scheduled to take place during January. And I hope this will help you to focus on your core business of teaching and learning during this difficult time. I also want to reassure you that contingencies are in place for these very difficult circumstances. In December, my department issued updated guidance to schools on remote learning, outlining the circumstances where schools are able to use remote learning and providing clear step-by-step guidelines on key considerations for school leaders when making this decision. This was enhanced last week through the provision of a range of resource materials on remote learning to further support schools taking this step. And for members' information, 75% of schools responding to the remote learning survey did not have to use remote learning at all last week and provided full timetables. With regard to examinations, my department has worked closely with SEA to make adaptations to GCSE, AS and A-level qualifications to take account of the disruption experienced by students. SEA, in line with the other UK exams bodies, will ensure that grading in 2022 takes account of the disruption experienced by learners and that they are not disadvantaged due to the pandemic. My department has also agreed with SEA a number of contingency measures to facilitate the awarding of qualifications to those who may miss exams due to illness or self-isolation. And should the public health situation change and public examinations have to be cancelled, I've agreed contingencies for alternative awarding arrangements. These can be stood up by SEA at pace. Detailed contingencies are in place. They largely reflect the 2021 arrangements, which worked smoothly. And it's quite simply utter nonsense to suggest that contingency plans for alternative awarding are not in place, and I want to reassure pupils and parents on that point. All of our young people will be enabled to complete their qualifications and progress to the next phase of education, employment or training. There were a couple of issues which were raised throughout the debate with regards to contact tracing. You'll understand this is still being led by the Department of Health and PHA. However, the need for PCR tests following a negative LFT has changed, which may require revised messaging by the Department of Health in relation to contact tracing, not only for schools but also for broader society. And I've asked the Health Minister to meet with me to discuss track and trace. Mr McCrossan raised the issue of other staff members. He may be aware that we do have an emergency register for classroom assistants and for cleaning relief responders. EA have engaged Premier Recruitment in order to look at catering supervisors and cooks, so that is also progressing. And with regards to the Childcare Temporary Closure Fund, we're currently at an advanced stage with economists and finalising a business case to go to DOF, and as soon as I receive approval on that business case, I will be making an announcement of an extension. Furthermore, with regards to the Sustainability Fund, we are also working with the sector on this. I have already made a bid, and again, this will reflect the potential need. In conclusion, Mr Speaker, the reality is there are no easy solutions to the COVID pandemic, which is endemic at present in our society. Some parties have presented oversimplistic solutions to complex problems. Instead of grabbing quick headlines, we need to work together across the political divide to support our children to remain in school safely. Our children's futures depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for that. And I call Nicola Brogan. The member has 10 minutes to wind this debate.
Can I first of all thank my colleague and Deputy Chair of the Education Committee, Pat Sheehan, for initiating this emergency sitting of the Assembly, and to thank all the members who supported his petition to do so. It's a really important topic that we're here to discuss today, and I'm glad that we have had the opportunity. Can I also thank all the members for their contribution and to the Minister for attending and for her remarks. Can I also join with all other members here in thanking our school leaders and school principals and all school staff and the hard work they've done to ensure that schools have been able to reopen after Christmas, and to ensure and continue face-to-face to ensure that face-to-face learning does continue despite the huge challenges they're facing. Right across the House, I think we are in agreement that we want to ensure that schools are kept open so that pupils do receive this face-to-face learning, but we must ensure that schools are safe. That schools are safe for pupils, safe for teachers, safe for classroom assistants and safe for all school staff. The disagreement here today seems to be on who is responsible for supporting schools to ensure that they can remain open safely. But of course that responsibility is with the Education Minister. In regards to financing of the air filtration devices, which was discussed, the process is clear. The Department of Education costs the equipment that the schools need. It then submits a bid for funding to the Department of Finance. And then the Finance Minister brings that to the Executive for a recommendation in relation to funding for the bid. And then the Executive makes the final decision on how much funding should be allocated. I do want to acknowledge that the Education Minister is facing a difficult task, but doing nothing, not having the right plans in place, isn't facing reality. For months now, school leaders and school teachers and their union representatives have been crying out for the correct support and guidance from our Education Minister. In the lead up to Christmas recess, the Education Committee heard from those on the front line. Every one of them wanted to keep schools open. Everyone placed a high value on children's learning and recognised the importance of children learning together in a school environment. Everyone recognised the significant safeguarding role played by schools and the negative impact school closure had on the mental health and well-being of pupils, much as Ms Dodds highlighted through her remarks this afternoon. But these school leaders on the front line had serious concerns that required urgent address. They included the unrealistic workload faced by principals, teaching staff, absences due to the virus, as we've already discussed widely here this afternoon, and difficulties recruiting temporary staff that we need in order to ensure the schools remain open safely. Their concerns also included outstanding maintenance issues that were undermining basic ventilation measures like being able to open windows and failure to distribute CO2 monitors and the lack of the ventilation units. But most of all, the main concern was about the apparent lack of planning. There was no blueprint or plan A or B. As a committee, we raised many of those issues with the Minister directly. As MLAs, we wrote to the Department, and today we have recalled the Assembly. So, Minister, we want to make sure that you are listening. We need to be certain that you're seeking the solutions and formulating an action plan so that schools can remain open safely. Schools and school leaders are facing unprecedented challenges, and it's really unfair if we were to leave them facing these challenges alone. As party spokesperson for children and young people, I would also like to alert you, as the Minister, to the degree of difficulties currently facing childcare and early youth sector. I'm glad to hear that you have put in a bid to extend the Childcare Temporary Closure Fund and the Childcare Sustainability Fund. These issues I've raised with you a number of times because the sector really is struggling. And I think it's often the sector that's overlooked, especially within the education. So we need to keep focus on early education as well. So I'm glad that you are looking into that there, but we'd really like to see confirmation that both funds will be extended. So I'd like, go ahead, Justin.
Would the member join with me in saying to all our children and young people who have impacted the terrible hardship throughout this pandemic that you are our future, you are strong, you have enormous wells of resilience, and those who are struggling, reach out, ask for help. It's okay not to be okay. You can overcome all obstacles. Stay strong.
The member keep her remarks through the chair, please.
I will, sorry about that. Thank you to the member for his intervention, and I absolutely agree with that there. It's been a very difficult 18 months to 2 years for children and young people, but they've shown real resilience, and it absolutely is okay not to be okay and to reach out and ask for help. We all would support that there and encourage children to reach out if they are suffering or have any kind of concerns in that way. So to conclude, I'd like to thank everyone for their contributions here today. I will of course support the motion, and I urge all members to do so.
Thank you. And the question is that the motion standing in order be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I'll just put the question again then. The question is standing in order be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. I want to thank all the members for their contributions this morning and this afternoon, and again, Happy New Year to all the members, and a happy and constructive New Year, I might add. Thank you. The next item on the order paper is the adjournment. The question is that the Assembly do now adjourn. The Assembly is adjourned. Thank you.